Number 12, Notre Dame versus Georgia Tech. It's actually a neutral site game in Atlanta, so kind of is a home environment for Georgia Tech because they are in Atlanta, but it'll be played at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the home of the Atlanta Falcons. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time game on ESPN. Storylines to know, and this is basically the storyline for every Notre Dame game until they lose again. Can they continue walking the tightrope right now? So they've really rebounded nicely from their Week 2 loss to Northern Illinois, but their backs are still against the wall in the college football playoff race because Notre Dame has to clinch. If they're going to make the playoff, it has to be an at-large spot. They're not in a conference, so they can't clinch a conference championship spot. So it's got to be one of the 7 at-large spots in the 12-team field. And a 10-2 record, just looking at their schedule, might not be enough, right? They do have some decent teams left on their schedule, like Army and Navy and Georgia Tech, obviously, as well, and USC at the very end of the year. But a 10-2 record against other teams that are 10-2, that might not be enough right now. So that basically leaves Notre Dame with no other option but to win out right now, to guarantee a spot. Because an 11-1 Notre Dame is guaranteed a spot in the 12-team playoff. So they basically have to win out. But according to PFF's power rankings, Dolan, Georgia Tech is the second best team the Fighting Irish have remaining, making this game a really, really critical bar to clear for Notre Dame right now.
It is. Georgia Tech, we've seen it. I know they've lost a couple of games, but look, this is a good football team, and they're an explosive football team. And I think we saw it. We've seen it from the first game of the year against Florida State when, we thought Florida State was better, right? But I think you've got a team that's very dangerous for Notre Dame here. Georgia Tech's defense is improved. Look, they're 5-2 and a very competitive 5-2. Explosive run game. Look, the one thing that sticks out to me is Haynes King last year led the Power 5 in interceptions, right? He's got 1 turnover-worthy play this season. The improvement from Haynes King. He's playing clean football now while still keeping that same explosiveness that he's always had. You've got a dangerous game here, and I'm still, for me, in the grand scheme, I still need to see Notre Dame's offense has looked better in more recent games, but they've also been playing teams like Stanford, teams like Purdue, who aren't really up to par with that. So I think we're going to find out if Georgia Tech makes a couple explosive plays, if Notre Dame can now keep up offensively against a good team like this.
So speaking of that Georgia Tech offense, you have that side of the ball in this one. So what should we be looking out for in the Yellow Jackets of the ball?
Well, we've done this before. The story is always, right, my favorite Atlanta law firm, right, Haynes and Haynes, right? Haynes King and Jamal Haynes in the run game. And we've talked about how it's kind of like this loose option attack, and they've got all the jet sweeps, and they got everything. You've got Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton outside. And I'll tell you, first thing before I get into the main thing, it's going to be big that Notre Dame in this game, especially that they lost Ben Morrison for the season.
Huge.
You talk about Singleton and Rutherford, one of the better pairs of receivers in the country. You have Rutherford, everything after the catch. Singleton can win downfield. I think that is going to be a big factor. But the bigger one to me, Georgia Tech, great run game, fantastic between the tackles this year, right? It's not just that they get out in space and hit the sidelines and do all the fast things. Got 5.8 yards per carry between the tackles this year, okay? And this is kind of weird. Also, real quick, only 3 teams in the country have more explosive runs between the tackles, too. You saw Jamal Haynes' game-winning touchdown against North Carolina. I mean, that's exactly what you're looking at. But this has kind of been a problem for Notre Dame, is stopping the run. And their interior players, some of their stars are not playing as well as last year. Right now, Notre Dame is 49th in the country in run D grade. But that's because they had a great game against Stanford last week, and Stanford can't run the ball. Before last week against Stanford, they were like 81st.
Yeah.
It's been a problem. And to me, look at the star players, and this is why I'm looking at these guys that really play between the tackles here. Howard Cross, 61 run D grade. Last year, I'm pretty sure it was somewhere around 83. Riley Mills, a 63. He was in the 70s last year. Jack Kaiser was one of the highest graded linebackers in the country. He's got a 69.4 run defense grade. It just has not been the same physically when you talk about Notre Dame's star players and stopping the run. Their front 7 with most of the same characters just hasn't been the same. And you look at them in total on runs between the tackles, they're 107th in the country in run defense grade. If Georgia Tech gets into I talk about it all the time, let a team get in their wheelhouse, let them get comfortable, and they'll beat you. Georgia Tech is one of those teams. They are not afraid to go out and run for 350 yards on somebody. They will do it. And Haynes King, they'll win a game that Haynes King only throws 10 times. They do not care. We've seen other games, the Louisville game where he came out and played well throwing the ball, but Louisville stopped the run in that game. That's really the only game where the run got stopped, right, for Georgia Tech. This Notre Dame front 7 is not, or the front 4 especially, is not Louisville. It's not. And Georgia Tech, if I'm telling you right now, this has the same feel to actually every Georgia Tech game has this feel, but especially when we were talking about that first one and we previewed that Florida State game, I was like, don't let them get to the stuff that they want to get to. Then you get to the play action shots when if you got guys like Xavier Watts coming up and doing. I just think this is a problem right now. And look, Notre Dame's great in coverage. They're still going to be pretty good in coverage, but Ben Morrison's a huge loss, right? But the run defense has not been quite what it was last year. Last year, they were really good in run defense. Obviously, they were an elite coverage unit, but these guys in the middle of their defense, I'm looking for Cross and Mills and Jack Kaiser at linebacker to step up because their highest graded run defender in the front seven is Drake Bowen, their other linebacker. And their three highest graded players in run defense on their team are all defensive backs. This is kind of getting to be a thing where it's like the secondary is maybe carrying more of a load than they should. And if Georgia Tech gets in their wheelhouse with again, Haynes, and then they take shots with Singleton and screens with Rutherford and all that stuff without Ben Morrison, this is a real problem. Georgia Tech, I'm going to be honest with you, they can score 40-plus points on almost any team in the country if you let them.
Yeah, absolutely. And look at the Notre Dame secondary too, Dalton. Without Ben Morrison, who is one of the best corners in the country, and it's still is going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Even with this hip injury, I still think he's going to be a first-round pick because that's how good he's been his entire career. But you look at that, Xavier Watts has been outstanding this year, one of the best safeties in America. We're actually doing a midseason All-American team, and I think Xavier Watts will be one of those safeties. Jordan Clark has been one of the best slot corners / outside corners that we have in college football as well. Jordan Clark has been really good. But now that Ben Morrison's hurt, you're starting probably at outside corner. Christian Gray, who's already been a starter this year, he's a sophomore. And then Leonard Moore is projected to start at the other one. He's a true freshman. So you got a young secondary. And the other safety is Aiden Schuler, who's a redshirt freshman. It's a young secondary that they have right now. So it's really – Jordan Clark is an older player. He's been great this year. And Xavier Watts, obviously, is an older player and has been great this year. But outside of them, the other three players that are starting are really, really young. So I think that's another key thing to look at in the Notre Dame secondary, especially now with Ben Morrison now done for the year, their best player in that secondary. My side of the ball, Notre Dame, really is interesting to look at this because it's strength for Notre Dame against strength for Georgia Tech. Weakness for Notre Dame against weakness for Georgia Tech. So right now, the Fighting Irish are an outstanding rushing team. They have a top 10 rushing grade in the nation. Jeremiah Love, Riley Leonard as well. Riley Leonard is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the nation. Love leads the nation with a 47% forced missed tackle rate so far this year. And honestly, Dawn, any rushing stat that is not led by Ashton Ginty, that shows you, this guy is also playing really well. So the fact that Jeremiah Love leads the nation in broken tackle rate when Ashton Ginty's second, by the way, obviously, because Ashton Ginty is either first or second in any stat in rushing.
He's probably offended that he's second now that you said that. He's going to try to be first after next week. He will be.
Yeah. The Michael Myers stance he's going to have it and get first next week. But yeah, right now, Jeremiah Love, 47% forced missed tackle rate that leads the nation. Riley Leonard is fourth in the Power 4 for quarterbacks with 425 rushing yards. And their offensive line is 22nd in run blocking grade so far this year. And so far as a team, Notre Dame is 7th in EPA per run. So by all accounts, they are an elite rushing team. Georgia Tech, though, really, really good in run defense. They are 26th in run defense grade this year, and they're also 26th in yards per attempt allowed. So you got a strength in Notre Dame against a strength in Georgia Tech. On the passing side, though, Notre Dame hasn't been as good. They're 6-6 right now in EP per pass, so really an average passing game, and they've struggled to consistently generate an aerial attack all year. Right now, Notre Dame, 78th in passing grade, 70th in receiving grade, 104th in pass blocking grade as a team. Nothing has really worked great in this passing game right now, from the quarterback to the receivers to the offensive line. Nothing is clicking right now, but Georgia Tech has a 62.8 defensive grade on passing plays, which is 114th in the country. They have the third worst pass rushing grade in America, and they're 102nd in coverage grade as well. So Georgia Tech is very vulnerable against passing offenses. Really good run defense, though. And then Notre Dame, passing offense has not been great this year, but their run game has been great. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the strength of the Notre Dame offense against the strength of Georgia Tech's defense. And then can one of the weaknesses win out in this one too? It's going to be a really, really interesting matchup to look at in this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think a crucial factor is going to be against a better team than they've played the last couple weeks if Riley Leonard can make maybe just 2 or 3 explosive plays through the air, right? Notre Dame, that's been the problem for the most part, is finding those shots downfield. I think one of the big catalysts of their win was that big early touchdown that he threw up the seam that they set up very well with play action and all that. If they can find just 2 or 3 explosives, just so not everything is such a grind for them, because it can be like that for Notre Dame, where it's like, man, they really work 4 yards at a time with this. If they can take a couple shots downfield against, you mentioned it, a vulnerable Georgia Tech secondary that's made a lot of mistakes this year, then I think that balance really helps Notre Dame.
A vulnerable secondary, and also they have no pass rush, 0 pass rush right now, and Notre Dame's offensive line, as good as they are in the run game, they're almost equally as bad in pass blocking right now as well, right? So it's a really interesting matchup on all sides. It's just strength on strength and weakness on weakness. So Dawn, ultimately, who wins this game? Does Notre Dame continue their playoff hopes, or do they suffer a potentially fatal blow here? And if they lose this game, like I said, they might be out of the playoff picture.
So I took Georgia Tech in a pretty solid-sized upset once earlier in the year, and that worked, right? I'm going to go for it again.
Ooh.
I think Georgia Tech has the better quarterback in this game. I think Haynes King has the advantage there. I think the Ben Morrison loss is a big one. And I know Notre Dame's always stacked with defensive backs, but look, Singleton and Rutherford, they're hard to cover. Georgia Tech's really explosive, and I just can't help but feel like, I know they have the talent. We've seen them do it before, but Notre Dame's front seven, this is not a game where you can be average. They've got to be great like they were last year. So if they step up, they can win this game. But until I see it, I'm taking Georgia Tech. I think, look, their run game, Haynes King, Jamal Haynes, and then what they have to complement it in Eric Singleton and Malik Rutherford on the outside, I think it's really one of the more stable things that we have in college football. Like, we know they're pretty good. Syracuse outscored them because that secondary. Kyle McCord was great, right? And Louisville got 2 non-offensive touchdowns in that game. That game was kind of fluky, and Haynes King was really good against Louisville, and that's a struggling secondary. I'm curious to see the impact of the Morrison injury, which team can make more explosive plays in the passing game. I'm going to bet on Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, 27-24.
Dawn, I have the exact same score as you, but not the same winner. I'm taking Notre Dame 27-24 over Georgia Tech. I think Riley Leonard is at least capable of making those throws that you talk about. And then Georgia Tech secondary, I have not been impressed by them at all this year. And then I think the Notre Dame run game too, as the Georgia Tech run defense is good. It's really good. Notre Dame's run game is elite, though, I think. And I think that's the advantage for them as well. And then defensively, even without Ben Morrison, they still have some dudes in that secondary with Jordan Clark and Xavier Watts, who, like I said, both of them might be in our midseason All-American team the way that they're playing right now, which comes out sometime this week. I think Friday we're going to put it out. But, yeah, I think Notre Dame, for that reason, is going to win this game 27-24. Don't feel great about it, but I think they'll keep their playoff hopes alive with a close win over the Yellow Jackets.